you go. You've taken the time, you found a tree, maybe it fell down in your backyard or your neighbor's yard due to a storm, maybe you found some free wood on Craigslist, or maybe, like this American elm, you found a lumber mill that had some rejects that you could snag. However you did it, you had a giant log that you chainsawed out, either out of the field, you lugged up, you back-breaking work, put in your bed of your truck, then you rushed home and tried to rough them all out as fast as you possibly can before this wood goes bad. You got it on the bandsaw, you wrangled it around so you could get the maximum size you went on there. Maybe when you're shaping it out, you're like me, you try and go for a nice balloon shape where it's maybe not a consistent circle, but the pressure from the inside is very even, a nice decreasing radius out there. Maybe if you're like me, you put a tendon on it and then realize that, hey, what you're doing required a recess to get maximum pressure because you're going to be putting some high torque on it. Whatever. Maybe you even did a little inappropriate caressing, admiring your nice shapely work. Whatever you did, you are now to this point where you've got to get out this middle section. And this right here is what differentiates a lot of woodworkers. If I were an artist, somebody that's maybe making a dozen bowls a year, putting high-end stuff into art galleries or giving them as gifts, my personal preference was I'd put a fresh, keen edge on my bowl gouge and I would just start shaving this center section out, taking advantage of all that carving opportunity to refine my skill. Paying attention to the grain direction, because I might find a bark inclusion in there would affect the grain slightly outside it, so I might want to get that waves involved, so maybe I'll come into a different shape on the outside and blend the two as I come through, just to make the best possible bowl and take the most advantage of the natural grain in the bowl. Some of the best bowls I've ever seen are exactly from artists like that, that just put everything into each bowl, and every bowl is somewhat unique because of that. Then you have other woodworkers out there, woodturners out there, that they produce 2,000-3,000 bowls a year. I'm thinking the likes of Glenn Lucas and Glenn Lucas is a very good example. They need to have something consistent that they can market and sell to like grocery store chains or Macy's or something like that. They want to buy a consistent shape, a consistent volume. Those guys, they look at the center section and go, well, if I just shave that out, that's just making a bunch of artisan hamster bedding, and people are not paying premium price for that anymore. Turning this into shavings is wasting money. There's got to be a way to get this center section out as a whole piece and use it as an other bowl. In fact, the old guys that did the pole lathes and stuff like that, the reason why they use hook tools that they could put a long curve on was they could come in and cut away a hemispherical shape out of that and then pull that center section out. The reason why we don't use hook tools a lot anymore is because those pole lathes, they would rotate one way, so you slice and then they'd reverse and it'd throw the shavings out. If you're constantly slicing as you go around, the shavings build up on the inside, create pressure, all of a sudden it grabs, it catches, throws the thing over, you go flying over the lathe, and bad things happen. But if you're getting that constant reversing action to clear it out, it's very safe. If you want an excellent example of somebody doing that, go watch one of Robin Wood's bowl turning videos. One of the best examples out there I know of. Anyways, nowadays when we want to core out the center section, there are a couple different ways of doing that. My father, he loaned me his Oneway system, which is kind of one paradigm of the coring set, where you scrape a consistent hemispherical curve out of it using a cutter that's on a curved blade like this, and you just rotate it through and it makes a perfect circle every single time. The blade, the curvature follows the blade right into the curve. The downside of that is it makes a perfect hemispherical, the same shape every single time. Grain be damned. It's not the most artistic aspect of it. There is a system out there, kind of epitomized by the McNaughton system, and that's what my dad replaced his setup with and why I could borrow his old one, which does allow you to take into consideration grain direction because you don't have to make a perfect hemispherical setup. The downside of that is it takes a lot more skill and knowledge to go into that. In fact, he had to take a couple classes on it just to figure out the basics of it. Whereas the Oneway system, where it's just the same setup every single time, basically you could just follow the instructions and figure it out on your own. It just comes straight through. I'm going to go over the Oneway system today to show you that, because I find that most people do a version similar to this, buy a version similar to this out there to start out coring, just because it is fairly intuitive. Along the way, I will tell you some variations that the McNaughton system does based upon feedback from my dad. And if you're like me, I only make probably 200 to 300 bowls a year. Basically, I'm kind of right in the middle of the artists and the people that are doing mass production. I want some stuff that I want to put into galleries. So I'll make the big bowl, outside bowl, my perfect gallery shaped bowl, and this interior side, I'll just make into similar bowl, consistent bowls that I can sell at markets, or people that are actually going to use them, farmers markets and stuff like that. Those sell very well there. So I actually end up having two different markets, the art gallery and the consistent stuff. And this setup with the Oneway, it works out pretty well for that. So let's take a look at a closer look at the Oneway system. The Oneway setup starts out with this base right here. You have a center point that you want to line up with the center of the bowl, and it will actually also set the depth of the cut you're doing. You lock that on to your bed rails with something like this, and they're shaped differently for each different lathe. You just have to be sure you don't lose them when you pull them out, because they are a separate part, and you do have shavings right underneath you that if that were to fall in there, you're never going to find it again. So I have a pretty good amount of depth right here, so I'm not going to worry about the depth. But if you had a little narrower bowl and this very consistent arc from the cutter would go up, blow out the bottom, you can set this back farther away and the pivot point will be farther away, so you get a shallower bowl. This one's pretty deep, so I'm just going to set it all the way forward and make sure I line it up with the center. I personally have found that keeping this brace at a straight angle allows me a little bit more flexibility, but there's no reason why you couldn't angle it here. That doesn't really matter that much. Just kind of line it up with the center and get it close to your bowl as possible. That's also why it's nice to have a nice flat face here, so they can spin freely without touching that. And then tighten it up. This next handle is allowed to move quite a bit. Now, these cutters come in different sizes. I have a 9-inch right here. This one right next one is an 11-inch, which you can see, 11-inch radius. And I also have a 13-inch one. And this being a 16-inch lathe, that makes sense. So I could have a 13-inch bowl, an 11-inch bowl, and a 9-inch bowl. The question comes in, which do you do first? Now, it used to be I did the largest first, and then I would cut it out, I would put it back between centers, I'd put a tenon on it, I'd switch that around, I'd put that in, and then I'd do the next size and reverse the whole process. When you do that one, you could also drill a hole right in the center point and put a screw thread onto it so you could just screw it in and off on the face side, so that you could put a tenon on the back side. That tenon would then go in the chuck, and you just kind of reverse it back and forth. I found a little bit easier way that I'm doing now. I'm going to do the center section first, so I have the 9-inch blade arm in here, and I'm going to go and get the 9-inch tool rest that comes with it. Now, each cutter has a matching tool rest that goes to it, and notice that the angles repeat. It is a very solid section right here that fits down into the guide, and this slides on the pop. But when you first start out, you got to put the arm to the outside, because you want your tool to be supported as close to the cutting edge as possible, and this is the main support. You then just drop it in. You then just drop this one in. Now, I will say this, I have learned the hard way that when you pull these things in and out, sometimes the shavings will build up in there and it won't seat fully propped down. And the idea is to set this up so it's cutting at the dead middle. So if you have shavings building up, you can be cutting a little bit too high and it'll get kind of grabby that way. So you just want to make sure you blow these things out. The same with the tool rest that goes right here. From here, you just set the tool rest. So now the pressure from the cutting edge is going down into the tool rest as close to that cutting edge as possible, and then you just tighten it up. Okay? So let's take a closer look at this cutting edge. The Oneway setup, like a lot of these perfect hemispherical scraping style cores uses a replaceable head, a cutting edge. And it's kind of like those carbide tools that a lot of people use to scrape their way through, though this is just high-speed steel. When you do this, do not lose this little screw right here, because if that goes in the sawdust, you are never going to find it. I keep a magnetic tray right by my lathe just to hold that kind of stuff. And they use a little Allen key to hold it up. Now if you look at these cutouts, they are a scraper. It is going to be scraping it. But if you look at the side, and I'll try and zoom in a little closer. So if you look at the side, you can see that it is a true scraper. It does not develop a burr on it. In fact, this is what they call a negative rake scraper. And it works without a cutting edge. It is actually grinding it off. But we are just roughing stuff out, so that doesn't really matter. So let's take a quick look at scrapers to understand what's going on at this cutting edge as it interacts with the wood. Okay, I have a scraper right here, what we refer to as a scraper in the turning world. But in fact, this is not a true scraper. It is actually a cutting edge. This has a pretty heavy burr on it. And to prove that, I've got a piece of paper. If you notice, it kind of catches on the edge and stops. It doesn't want to push off. I'm actually catching on that very edge of the tool right there, and it's catching on that burr. There's a slight burr there, a raising of the metal to create a nice cutting edge. And what that happens when you use it is you do get shavings. But notice how I'm using it. I'm tilting it down because that burr has to engage in it. If I engage it straight flat, it doesn't really cut that well because the burr is rolling over. If I lift it up a little bit to get that negative angle, I can get nice smooth shavings off of that. See, I'm getting shavings here. Okay? A true scraper grinds the wood off. It does not have a burr. It is basically two angles that meet. Ow, I got myself. It's two angles that meet for infinity. So how can I turn this into a true scraper? Well, if I grab my sharpening stone, I take it, I'm going to turn this into a negative grape scraper because I'm going to grind the metal at a slight angle down. I'm not going to do this at too much. It doesn't have to be too much. So this is now a negative rake scraper because I've ground this edge down a little bit. Now if I put this straight against the wood, because the metal is cut at a downward angle, it is a negative rake approaching the wood, and there is no burr here. It is two angles that meet for infinity. And I will get a shaving, but it's not those nice long shavings, cutting shavings I was getting. It is more this grinding stuff out there. And that is truly scraping. So let's go back and take a look at that cutter real quickly. This is the top of the cutter. The screw goes there and it sits flat on that lever and it goes straight into the wood. But if you look at it, see how it's angled right there? Well, these bottom angle meets the top angle, so it is, in effect, a negative rake scraper. It is not cutting at all. It is grinding off the wood. You also have the same piece on the side. So in order to sharpen these, you have to, basically what you do is you sharpen from underneath up, and then to get these top sides you sharpen it straight down. So you're bringing the level of the top of it down to make this edge right here, and that's going to meet up with these two side edges to create the perfect angle. And this one right here is going to meet up with the top. So let's go to the grinder real quickly and let me show you how I sharpen these based upon understanding how to sharpen negative rake scrapers. Now, Oneway does sell a jig to do this, but I don't have that one, so I'm just taking what knowledge I have from other areas of woodworking and transferring them to get a good edge here. So real quickly, I'm going to sharpen the top of this, which is going to create the angle for these wings, and I'll sharpen this point in a separate section. So what I do is I will actually take it, and instead of holding it straight again flat, I'm going to angle it a slightly bit to create that negative rake. And I'm just going to touch this very edge. There's no reason for me to grind off this whole section. All I'm concerned about is the part closest to the edge. and just very carefully, lightly touch it. Until I grind off all the wood shavings, which are a nice marker for me. Getting closer. There we go. So I have a nice shiny edge on both sides, so I know these two wings are going to cut. And now I'm going to do the bottom of the top section. And notice, because I'm holding it with my hand, I can tell that I'm not getting it too hot. And I'm not actually holding it very hard. You don't see too much sparks coming off. Once again, I've ground the bottom to match up there. And on this one instance, I don't do this all the time, I'm going to touch the top up just to make it nice and clean. There we go. So I now have sharp edges on everything that's going to be cutting, and they're all going to be negative rake scrapers. So now that we got that sharpened, we go ahead and put the little cutter head back in there, making sure that we do not lose this tiny screw. And if you do lose the shavings, I can't hold it, keep a magnet around it. You can just run it through the shavings and you find these small metal pieces. But put it in. Now this negative rake scraping concept seems to be consistent throughout this coring style of this, even with the McNaughton. The downside to the McNaughton is that they weld the cutter head onto the knives that they use, and you have different knives. So once you wear that back, you kind of have to either have a new cutter head welded back on or buy a new knife. And I think most people just buy a new knife. These replaceable ones are nice. The downside is there isn't much metal there, and if you're constantly going to the grinder all the time, you go through these quite a bit, because I have to resharpen mine pretty much every single cut I go through it. So if you don't want to go through these so much, keeping a little diamond stone around makes it easier, because you can just lightly touch it up. All you have to do is resharpen it. You don't have to grind so much out of it, and these will make them last a little bit longer. But what I have found is one of these only lasts me about 20, maybe 30 of my coring, and then I got to buy another one, and that adds up kind of quickly. The downside of the setup. Whereas that McNaughton one, it's easier to sharpen with this thing, so they tend to last a little bit longer. Pluses and minuses of everything. Oh man, I did cut myself on this edge. I'm bleeding for you guys! Okay, anyways. So, I come over here, and this is what's nice about the one-way setup. Because once you got this set up, it's, I'm not going to call it idiot-proof, but all you got to do is watch your speed coming through. Now, on that, set your speed low. You know, 300 to 400 RPMs is all you need on this. This is not a speed thing like I do most of my turning. Getting too much speed will generate a lot of heat, the shavings will build up a lot quicker, and it'll catch easier that way. The downside, because you have to go so slow, is I have a 1.5 horsepower motor on this particular lathe that runs off 110. It ain't quite enough. It's very easy to bog these things down. So you kind of have to balance how much pressure you put, and if you haven't put a lot of pressure on it, it means you need to resharpen your edge, and the motor speed, which is also another reason why you saw me put a recess on and cut off that tenon I originally did, was because a recess allows for a little bit more torque. I have had these snap off when using a tenon because I don't have the monster jaws to make a huge tenon. I have the standard jaws that make a normal tenon. And tenons, they can't break off. You just have to be careful with them. So let's get going and start coring this out. And just to reiterate a point earlier, I am coming in and hitting this pretty much at dead center on my little lathe right there, the center point right there. You don't want it to engage too high, because then the force hitting this thing is going to be pushing your arm out, and even though this is steel, there's enough torque in there, it will wander around. You want it to hit there right at the dead center, right at level, so that the force is going down, so that this arm is not going to be torqued one way or the other. So let's start it up, make sure we come in at a fairly low speed. That right there is about 300. I've got a nice flat face, so it should have a nice entry, and I'm not going to put too much pressure on it. Notice that center tooth engages, and it kind of steers the whole setup, and now the sides are going to hit. And notice I am getting shavings, even though it's a negative rake scraper, simply because I have a very sharp edge, which is what you want. Now I can consistently go in about a half of the way in, because all the shavings are getting spelled out. It's not building up on the inside. But after a while, notice the motor started bogging down. I was going too fast, too much pressure. But after a while, the shavings start clogging up on the inside, creating excess heat. So then I had to come out and knock it off a little bit. That's too much pressure, not enough horsepower. They sell these things for mini lathes and stuff, but I cannot imagine using a coring system on the, not only can you not get enough big enough piece of wood on there to make it worthwhile, but man, they just don't have enough power. And I almost want to say that this thing right here doesn't have enough power. I am bogging it down fairly easily, and it tends to bog down the closer you get to the long grain, because right now I'm going cutting straight across end grain. When I start getting into the long grain, you can't put as much pressure down. See? Shavings build up. Very light cut. I'm going to do this for a little while longer. I'll cut ahead till right before it comes off. Okay, I was talking to y'all and got a bit distracted. I have not gone too much farther. I'm about right here. It's cutting. So, if you see right there, I've come out to about the bend in this arm. Right there, that far over my tool rest. So at this point in time, I'm going to turn the bowl off. I'm going to come down. I'm going to loosen up this little thing right here, the rest that it goes into. Let me zoom out so you can see. I'm going to relocate it so I can slide this in. So now this longer arm will add support to this. So I slide it in, I bump it till it doesn't go any farther, then I back it out, and then I make sure it will wiggle. That way I know it's not touching at any one spot on the sides, so it will not be jamming up by itself. Once again, I make sure it wiggles. I make sure that the arm rides right on top of it, so now my cutting edge has support on the inside of the bowl. This is something different than the McNaughton system. That tends to use double braces to keep your tool from torquing over from the torque at the cutting edge, and they just extend that arm farther and farther out. It is bracing it back here and not inside the bowl. Okay, I've relocated this bar rest so it's all the way in, not touching the wood. That'll give me my most depth for the support of my cutting edge. And I'm closer to the center now. If you notice, I can come all the way in and I'm almost horizontal. Now, if I was completely horizontal, I'd be real close to the edge. At this point in time, what I will do is stop occasionally, go in slowly, and I will tap. And when this bowl starts to get loose, I know that I could probably twist it off. But if you do go all the way through and it breaks loose, you've got this stuff over here, so it's probably going to come out over there or just rattle around in your bowl. But it's not the safest thing in the world if that happens, because it could torque this bowl. So you just want to approach it easily. Here we go. Listen, and you can hear the difference as you get closer. The sound gets deeper and deeper and deeper. See, it's getting looser. Can you see that? But it's not quite there. Nice and slow. I think that'll do it. See? It's loose now. So I can take this off and pop it out. So we have a nice end. Now the next technique is you need some kind of way to attach this to the lathe so you can turn this piece out. So this is my technique that I kind of picked up, I've started doing recently. Grab my axe, chop off this little tenon that's left. You got to take this off to put the center, your live center on. And what do you end up with this hollow? You have the perfect jam chuck. Just kind of center it in there. It doesn't have to be a perfect. Bring your tailstock up. And turn a tenon on it. And that will give you something to put into your chuck. What I like about this is I don't have to take this one off. It seems to be faster. I've got my little braces back in here. Blow them out. Now I'm going to grab the next size up, the 11-inch. This was 9-inch, 2 inches bigger is 11 inches. Drop that in, and I'm going to have to adjust this so it will work with the 11-inch cutter. Grab the 11-inch cutter. And I'll attach that handle. It uses 2 Allen screws to do that one, and sharpen this cutter up. And as I said, I end up sharpening every single one. Otherwise it gets too dull and it bogs down the motor too much, and it adds too much torque on this so it can twist off. So it's better to sharpen every single time. Okay, now I want you to think about something. I've got a perfect ellipse right here. A perfect curve in there. It's nice and round, just like that cutter head was. This one's exactly 2 inches bigger. So I'm now going to end up with a blank that's roughly 1.25 inches, because you got to take into account for the curve created by these 1/4 inch cutting edge. So am I going to be able to turn a tenon on the bottom of this without getting it very thin? No, not really. So what I'll end up doing is I will let this dry as is without a tenon, and then I will stick some kind of thing on the tailstock and a drive center to turn it round after it's dried out. So each subsequent bowl after that is going to be exactly the same shape. And if you have a larger lathe than mine, you can get 4 or 5 bowls out of a large blank if you want to, but they're all going to be identically the same. One cool thing is that it's called a nested set, and people will pay big bucks to get a matching nested set if they want to, but every single one's going to be exactly the same. My personal opinion, it takes a little bit of the artistry out of it, and I don't really like those, but this is almost free bowls for me. I've already paid to get all this bigger bowl, and that's my money bowl. All these interior ones are just kind of bonuses. So let's core out the center section and see what we got. And I've started the clock on this camera, so let's see how long it takes. Y'all notice that it's spinning, it seems to be warping. That's actually, this bowl is drying on the lathe. The more I cut out of it, the more I'm getting reaction wood out of it. It's actually warping here and now. So occasionally I will come back out and refeed this in just so I make sure I have a good passage through. I'm also slowing down a little bit because it's becoming a little bit unbalanced as it moves. It's things you just have to take into consideration as you work through it. we're getting close to the end. This one's getting kind of grabby, so I'm going to go ahead and just take it out and wedge it out. You saw it stopping the lathe quite a bit because that tells you how much torque it is and that this is not the most powerful lathe in the world. But if you need to wedge it out, these things right here make pretty good levers. There we go. And we end up with a nice 1.5, 1.25 inch bowl blank. Voila! Perfectly set round, perfectly thickness. This will dry very nicely. And now we are ended up with the money bowl. I can now take my bowl gouge and shape it however I want to match the outside. This is the only bowl I was really concerned with. All these other ones are a bonus. These would have been artisan hamster bedding. Now I have something I can sell. Well, there you go. 3 bowl blanks out of 1 core. How cool is that? Plus, all the grain lines up. So you basically have a nested set. Can't get any better than that. Charge extra for that one. Now, there are guys out there that would do 4 and 5 cores out of 1 blank, and they charge a premium for it. Me, I look at it like this. I have my money bowl. This is the one I really wanted. These interior ones are just bonuses. Now this top one, because it was solid, I could shape this any way I wanted. So this could be a nice salad bowl that I could sell at a market for, $30, $40. They'd cover my booth fee. This bonus one pays for itself right there. These center ones are a perfect hemispherical, and they're all going to be that way. I'll be able to put a foot on it, but there's not much more I can turn away on this one after it starts warping. So it's going to be this shape. And all the other interior ones, if I do another 3 or 4, are going to be matching that shape. So they alone sell pretty well. Sell 3 as a nested set will work pretty well. The next step on these is painting them up and putting them in for drying. Now, I use the Oneway system on this one, which is that hemispherical negative rake scraping system. And there are other versions of it like that, but the Oneway seems to dominate that little niche of it. My dad has a McNaughton, I forget how you say it, the Core Saver System. And he does like it a lot better, but he does admit that it took a little bit longer to learn how to do it. In fact, he took a couple classes on it. And the guys that really do this a lot, make those huge nested sets, they tend to prefer that system too. But understand, they do this a lot. Whereas me and probably most woodworkers out there, we'll go through stages where we'll do a lot of coring, then we might not do it for 4 or 5 months. We'll do a lot of coring, we might not do it for 4 or 5 months, depending upon the inventory of wood we have available to us. And I typically only do 200 or 300 bowls a year. If you are one of those artists who's only doing a dozen or so to give away as gifts, I cannot see recovering the capital investment, because these setups are not cheap, very easily. Whereas if you are selling quite a few, it's these extra ones that's the bonus money, and it's these extra ones that will pay for that system over a year or so. What I like about the Oneway system, it's fairly easy to sharpen. The McNaughton system, or McNaughton, again I'm forgetting the pronunciation, you can do that with your hand tools fairly easily, but the cutter head is welded on, so you're either going to have a new cutter head brazed on, or get a whole new knife whenever you wear that one out. Where the Oneway system, even though you go through those little bits quite often, they're fairly easy to order direct from them. And if you sharpen them by hand most of the time, and just go to the grinder fairly infrequently, they will last a good long time. But on those Oneway system, I do find that I have to sharpen on every single bowl, and they are small bits. Take that into consideration. Now, I hope you enjoyed this video. I know I enjoy making them, but please understand we are trying to make a living at this one. We use this as marketing to not only sell our own bowls, but I have lines of boxes. I make some display cabinets. I have some shop-made tools, and occasionally when I go out and find a good antique tool that replaces one of the ones I have in here, I'll swap them out and put that up for sale on our store also. You can find that store at wortheffort.com. I also have a line of really nice t-shirts that really do help us out to keep the lights on here and keep making these videos. So if you enjoyed this or you think other people would learn from it, please consider patronizing us by visiting wortheffort.com. And remember one last thing, it is always worth the effort to learn, create, and share with others. Y'all be safe and have fun.